All right, so we are going to be recording this session today too, so if you did have others on your team that you wanted to attend this today, but they didn't get a chance to attend, we will be creating a recorded session, and just let us know in the Q&A panel if you'd like to get the recorded session, and we'll make sure that we send that on over to you. All right, so your presenter here today is Steve Miller. I have a little over 26 years of experience with both software development and testing, and I have been using the ALMComplete product since the early days of the creation of the product back in 2000. So hopefully you guys are in pretty good hands today. All right, so when we started this new release of the 2011 release of ALMComplete and QAComplete, we really started from our client base to try to really understand what you really needed in the product. So for those of you that don't know, we do have a client advisory board, and the client advisory board consists of about 15 to 20 clients that have agreed to participate. And they drive a lot of the roadmap of the product for us. So they give us ideas about what they would like in the product. They give us feedback on the things that they feel like we do well and the things that we can improve on. And we started out the year, earlier in the year, with a meeting in March to present what we had heard from them over the past year and the improvements that they would like to see in the product. And we created this entire release around the items that came out of that March meeting. So we're happy to say that everything that we delivered in this specific release was totally driven by our client advisory board. So that's another reason, if you're not on the client advisory board, let us know if you want to participate in that. Just you can even put it in the Q&A panel. Put your email address there, and we'll make sure we get you hooked up for the client advisory board. So when we started this release, what we really wanted to do is we wanted to have an alternative for mid-sized, small and mid-sized clients that really needed a more robust testing solution, and they didn't really want to go the HP route. They were tired of dealing with the HP sales team. They were tired of the deployment and the support issues that comes along with that. So we really wanted to provide a very viable solution that would be an alternative there. So that's hopefully we were able to accomplish that with this specific release. Now today what we're going to explore is we have a lot of new features in the software, and we're going to go through each one of those in an amount of detail today. We're going to start over in release management. One of the things that you'll notice is that we can manage releases a lot more reliably than we could before. We'll also talk about how, as you're working in a release or an iteration or a sprint, how you can tie requirements that you're developing back to that release and or that sprint or that build. The biggest improvements that we made with this release are around the test management areas. You'll see that we totally redesigned our test management modules from scratch. So we rebuilt this from the bottom up. So as you probably remember from our old test management solution, it was really just a way of tracking any test cases that you had out there. You had a big rich text field that you could put your steps, your expected results in, but it was really hard to see your steps and your expected results right next to each other. So we really took a hard look at other products, and we talked with our client advisory board about the things that they liked about our product and disliked from the test management perspective. And we came up with a whole new paradigm. We now have the ability to have a set of reusable tests. You can then group those tests into test sets so that you can run groups of tests for specific reasons. You can tie those test sets back to one or more releases and or agile sprints if you're interested in doing that. You can also set up configurations. We realize that a lot of our clients are doing a lot of web-based testing and with their applications. So a lot of times they'll want to test those with different operating systems and browser configurations. So we have this new area called configurations that allows you to establish those different types of configurations. You can link those over into the test sets area and see the run activity at that configuration level. We also realized that if we are going to start bringing on additional quality center clients, we had to have an easy way for them to move out of that product and into ours. So we worked with one of our partners to create an HP Quality Center conversion tool that's now available for use. So that's another interesting thing. Now, as we go through this demo today and through the webinar, feel free to ask any questions in that Q&A panel as you've been using that before, because I will keep an eye on that and I will answer any questions that come along. I may hold some of the questions towards the end because they may be answered as we go along, but don't be shy. Feel free to use that Q&A panel. That's what that's there for you. Okay, so one of the other things that we added here with the new release is a little better Agile Empowerment. And what I mean by that, if you're using the project planning tool that we have today, we didn't have a really great way to link that back to a release and or have multiple project plans that link back to a release. We've added the capability to do that. We've also added a new area, which was formerly called our Quick Tasks area. It's now called Agile Tasks. It just gives you a little bit leaner way of doing project management if you're interested in that. And then finally, we took some key feedback from our clients telling us that they liked the task board that we had before, but the problem with it was that it wasn't a team task board. In other words, if you're doing, let's say, a daily stand-up using Scrum, and you wanted to be able to easily toggle between team members and look at the status of all of their tasks that they have out there, it was not as easy to do that with the task board that we had before, so they wanted us to turn that into a team task board, which we've done. We even took it a step further than that. We not only put a team task board out there for your project management needs, we also now allow you to pull up a list of defects on the task board, a list of requirements, a list of Agile tasks, so you can see any of those artifacts directly from that team task board, and you can log time on others' behalf if you want to do that. Finally, we kind of rounded out this release with some new dashboards and some new reports. We spent a lot of time on the dashboarding and the reports. We wanted to really tighten up the traceability capabilities of the product, and hopefully we hit the mark on that. I'll show you some of those dashboards today. I'll show you some of the more in-depth traceability that you can get out of that. And any feedback that you have on how we did on that would be really helpful for us as well. The final thing we did was we also wanted to improve the lives of our on-premises or our enterprise clients. As you know, in the past, anytime we had a new release of the software, it usually followed to our on-premises or enterprise clients usually 2 to 4 weeks after we went into production for our software as a service clients. And the basic reason for that was we really didn't have a really good upgrade utility to be able to bring those up to the current release. So we spent a lot of time on that with this release. So we now have an upgrade process that's really painless. You can just download it, install it on your servers, and then a few minutes later you're up and running with the latest release. So hopefully that'll make the lives easier of our on-premises and enterprise clients. All right. So any questions before we jump right in today? All right, now I do want you to stick around towards the end of this because I am going to ask you to fill out a quick little survey. We won't do that now, but we'll do that towards the end of the demonstration today because we do want to hear your feedback, because your feedback is absolutely imperative for us. That's what allows us to keep growing the product and innovating the product, is direct feedback from you, because we want to make sure that we're delivering a product that's going to meet your needs. All right. So if there's no questions, we will go ahead and jump in and start taking a look at the product. Okay, so we're going to start here in this new releases area. You'll probably notice that we have a new tab here called Releases. And this is an area that allows us to track and organize releases as well as Agile sprints as well as builds. So one of the things that you can do with the releases area is you can come in here and you can create folder structures. So if you have different product lines that your team is working on, you can come in here and you can create different folder structures for each one of those product lines. Once you have a folder here, you can then start creating releases underneath that particular product line. For example, this orders application here, we've defined a release called Release 1.0. Now within Release 1.0, because we happen to be doing Agile development here, we've also created some sprints. You'll see that we're going to do this in 3 Agile sprints, which simply means that we're going to time box it. We're going to do a certain amount of the feature set in the first sprint, which may be a month of work. Then we're going to follow that on with a new set of features in the second sprint, and then we're going to follow that on with another set of features in the third sprint. So you can see how we can very easily organize that. So how do you create these things? Well, the first thing you do is you come to the releases area, and if you wanted to add a new product line here, you can just press add here. So let's say that you were going to create a new product called uTunes or something like that. You just come here and you press, you type in uTunes here. Once you get here, you can then press add new, and that'll take you into the ability to create a release. So here I can give it a release name. Maybe I call this uTunes Release 1.0. All right. You can also provide a status. Now, if you've worked with the tool before, you're probably familiar with the way we handle statuses, and you probably know that you can wrap workflow around those statuses as well. You can do that with releases here. So if you wanted to implement some type of workflow around those statuses, you'll be free to do that. I'm going to put this here in an awaiting start state. And notice that we have begin dates and end dates for this release. Well, if we're going to be using Agile here, we probably wouldn't put a begin and an end date here because we're probably going to create some Agile sprints underneath this, and then we'll probably time box those. So instead of placing any begin and end dates here, I'll tell it to automatically adjust our estimated dates, and then I also will assign this release maybe to my project manager over here, and then I can give this release a description. So what should we put in the description? A good thing that you might want to consider putting in the description would be maybe some release goals or maybe some success criteria for your release, that kind of thing, because by putting this information here, you'll see later on that we can create some really interesting release reports that will show you that description as well as all requirements that were delivered in the release, all of the tests that were run against the release, any defects that were discovered. It'll also do, it'll show you any tasks that you completed, how many, what your variances were, that kind of stuff. So you can add as much description here as you like. Once you press submit, it'll then create that release as you see it has done here. And then if you wanted to start breaking that release down into sprints, you can come over into that area, just expand that release right here, and then press this little green button here, and it'll say, do you want to add an iteration or do you want to add a build? Now, an iteration is kind of a time box set of deliverables, so that would be like an Agile sprint. A build is more like something that you would do after you get into production, so it may be a patch or something like that. So why would we want to track that in here? Well, the reason for that is you may want to associate some defects with a particular patch so that you can go back later on and figure out what defects were fixed in what patch. So that's when you might want to use a build. So again, to add an iteration, you just press add iteration. You can give it a name. We can say sprint 1, for example. We can give it a status. If we plan to start this sprint today, we can choose that. If we want to end up 30 days later, we can use our up arrow on the keyboard to actually increment the dates here, as you can see. So I don't know if you've used that or not, but anytime you're in a date field, you can use the up arrow on your keyboard to increment the date, and you can use the down arrow to decrement the date. Okay, so we'll make that a 30-day sprint. We'll assign that over to our project manager. If we want to describe what we are doing in this particular sprint, we can do that here. So maybe in this case, we're just creating the ability to search for artists or something like that. Okay, press submit there. It'll then create the sprint underneath that particular release. All right, so that's how you define a release. So let's go and look at some releases that we already have defined and some iterations here. And I'm going to move this over so we can see a little better. Now, one of the big advantages here of being able to manage releases at this level is, first of all, you can see all of the related artifacts. So I can see in this particular sprint here that we're going to develop 5 requirements or deliver 5 requirements in that sprint. I can also see that I've developed 15 tests, and we found 49 defects during the testing process. If you're using our project management modules, you can also see how many project plans are linked to the release as well as how many tasks are linked. If you're using our new Agile Tasks feature, you'll be able to see how many Agile tasks are linked back to the release as well. Now at this point you may also want to look at some of the details that make this up. Notice this little item here called drill down. If I click on that little drill down report here, that will analyze that release in detail. So it'll look at the release holistically. It'll tell you what's in that release. So this shows me all of the requirements that we're delivering in the release, how many test runs we've done against those requirements, how many have passed, how many have failed, how many are waiting run, and how many defects have been discovered linked back to that requirement. So much better traceability there. You'll also see all of the tests that you're running in this particular release, the last time they were run, what test set they were run in, and how many defects were discovered. You'll see what test sets have been run in this release and in what browser and operating system configuration you've run those under. So that's showing off some of our new configuration capabilities. And you'll see defects that have been discovered as well as an analysis of any working time that you've applied in this particular release so that you can do variance reporting and that kind of thing. All right, so the drill down report will allow you to get to a lot of the information that you need. Now, in addition to the drill down report, you'll also see some dashboards here. We'll come back to that just a little bit later when we look at all the dashboards, and you'll be able to see a lot of the traceability things that we were talking about earlier and how you can utilize that to help you better manage your life cycle. So we'll look at that just a little bit later on. All right, so once you have a release and or a set of sprints, how can we now work with those? In other words, how can we tie requirements to those? How can we tie these tests that we want to run back to those? How do we tie any defects that we discover back to those? Well, you'll notice that when I go into the requirements area, we've added a new tab here over on the left-hand side. You'll still see your familiar folder structure here, and you'll see a new area here called Releases. And this is where you can position yourself on a specific release. Notice that if I go here and I come over here my folders and I click at the very top level of the folder, it's going to show us 16 requirements that we're working on. All right. But if I go to my release and now I drill down into Sprint 1, you'll see that it'll now requery this and it'll show that we're only delivering 5 requirements for this first sprint. If I want to look at the second sprint, it now requeries and shows me the 4 requirements we're going to deliver in that particular sprint. If I come all the way back up to the top, Release 1.0, it's going to show us all 16 items. All right. So the first thing you can do is position yourself on a release and or a sprint, and notice that it changes it right here. So you can always see what sprint or release you're on by looking at that this release item right here. Now, once you're positioned on the sprint, you can then come into your folder structure. Now, what this allows us to do is before, as you probably remember, we didn't have that releases capability, so you ended up creating some directories under here for each one of your releases and Agile sprints so that you could tie your requirements back to that sprint. Now you have a lot more capability. Now you can start to organize your requirements in some functional way. So you can see that this orders application has some batch processing capabilities. It has some order maintenance capabilities. It has all of these different capabilities here. And you can then look at that just at a release level. So I can come back here and just look at a particular sprint, come back over here. It'll now relimit these down to just the 5 items, showing us where they're falling in our functional areas. Okay, so so you can see how you can now start to organize these in some logical manner, but then come back to the release and then filter based on what release you're in. Okay, I had a question here from Donald. He says, is ALMComplete and QAComplete one and the same? That's a good question, Donald. ALMComplete and QAComplete are really the same product underneath the covers. The only difference is ALMComplete has some additional features that QAComplete doesn't have, and we expose them from ALMComplete. The big differences are that ALMComplete has this project management tab that you probably don't see in QAComplete. It has this collaboration tab, and it has this list tab. So other than that, the capabilities are the same. Good question, though. All right. So what we've seen so far is we've seen how we can create releases. We've seen how we can kind of divide those releases down into Agile sprints. we've seen how we can come in and start to organize our requirements now along these functional lines. And we've seen how we can set ourselves up for specific releases. So how do you tie a requirement to a release? Well, if you're in a particular release like this Sprint 1 here, and then you come over to the folder like File Operations here, and you click Add, it'll automatically place this requirement in that release. It'll do that automatically for you. And you will know that it's doing that for you by scrolling down here. You'll see that we use our traceability capability there. Okay, so it's automatically linking it to that. If you wanted to remove that link, you can remove it by just pressing that little button there. If you wanted to link it to a different release or maybe multiple releases, you can come here and do that as well. You can say, well, I actually want to deliver this in Sprint 2 and Sprint 3 instead. So you can do that kind of thing. This is another change that you'll see in the software. Prior to this release, you didn't have the ability to select one or more things when you were linking like this. Now it gives you more capability, so you can link more than just one item here to a specific item that you're working on. So we've enhanced that capability there as well. All right, so any questions on how you can create a requirement or how you can link up an existing requirement back to a specific release or a specific sprint within a release? All right, now let's look at the test management capabilities. Okay, James asked a question here. Thanks for asking this, James. James says, is there any way to search for a requirement? Yeah, absolutely. In fact, let's go. We can come all the way back up to and look at all of our releases, and we can come back over to our folders, and we can see that there's 23 requirements in here. So let's say that we're looking for a requirement that has something to do with PDF, right? So we can tell it to search for the word PDF in all of the fields, or maybe just the title of the requirement. You know, you have a lot of capability there. And then it'll find anything that meets that criteria. So that's what we call a quick search. Now, if you want to turn that filter off, you just come here and turn the filter off. Now, let's imagine that you have a little more interesting search. You can come over here to the filters area, and you can build more like a Boolean search. You'll see that I have a number of different searches here. So this one's searching on anything that's assigned to me. That also has a status that's not closed. All right, and then when I execute that query, then it comes back and shows me all the items that meet that item. Now, the other thing is, how can we search on items that are linked? That's another thing that James was wanting to know. Let's say that you knew that there was a release that you wanted to search on. Well, we can do releases pretty easily because we can just come over here and click on the release, and it's just going to show us that. Probably a better example of that is, let's say that we had a test case, and we had linked that test case back to a requirement. How can we find all of the test cases linked back to a particular requirement, right? We can do that as well. Let's look at Sprint 1 here, and we'll look at all of our requirements. And we can see that we have this OAS 0010 requirement here. If you wanted to search your test library for that, what you can do is you can come back and look at all of your tests in your library, and then you can do that quick search just like we did before, and then you can paste in the requirement name here. And then here, rather than looking at all of the fields, you can tell it to search on the linkages. All right, and if you do that, then it'll pull back any test cases that have been linked back to that specific requirement. Does that help, James? Great. All right. All right, so we talked about requirements, we talked about releases. Now let's take a look at the test management side of it. Before this release, you probably remember we just had an area called test cases. And in the test cases, it really worked like requirements or defects, where you would define a test case. You could organize them here by release, and then you could kind of figure out, you could run through those. The things that, the feedback that we heard about our test case feature before was that it had some limitations. One is that it wasn't as easy to organize it along functional lines, because you had to try and tie it to a release and the functional lines. So now we've kind of broken that. You can now come in and create different tests for different functional areas. Okay. Another thing that we were asked about was, if you remember, when you created a test case before, you had a really big field here that was kind of a rich text editor, and that's where you defined your steps, and then we had a separate one for expected results. And the problem with that was it was really hard at a step level to see what the step was and then what the expected result was side by side. So what we've done is we've created this new area called steps. All right, so you can define individual steps, and you can have the expected result right next to it. Okay. The other benefit of that is that if you're writing a test case and you wanted to pull some test steps from another test case, you can easily do that. You can come and you can navigate your library over here. You can choose one of the tests here, and it'll show you all the steps. If you wanted to then pull that set of steps right into here, you can just drag and drop it. You'll see that it brought these into here. If you want to get rid of those, you can very easily do that. If you wanted to rearrange steps, in other words, let's say that we wanted to enter the price per unit before the product, you can take this and just rearrange it by dragging and dropping it. Okay. Sometimes you may come across critical steps. In other words, if this step here does not pass, we don't want to continue testing because it's a critical step. We added the ability to flag a step as critical, so that if you don't pass that step, you can't continue on with the testing. It'll block everything down below that. So we've added that capability. One of the other things that we've added there is we've added the ability not only to see the steps on the test case, but you can also review any run history. So you can come back over here and you can look at every time this test has ever been run. You can see what release or sprint it was run in, what test set it was run in. You can see what configuration it was run under. So if you ran it under a different operating system or browser, you can see that. You can see whether it passed or failed, and you can also see how long it took to run. This is really good because it starts to average out the run times for all of your tests, so that you can come back on this edit screen and see the average amount of time that it takes to run this particular test. So this one takes on average about 35 seconds to run. Okay, and you can also see that over here on your listing screen. You can see average run time here. You can see the date that it was last run, what the last run status was. You can see what test set it was last run in. You can see who ran it last. You have a lot of analytics that you can get to now that you didn't have before. All right. So question from Carol. Carol says, can the steps be uploaded with the initial test case, or would the steps need to be manually entered per the test case? Good question, Carol. So we do allow you to upload the steps when you're uploading it. We have two ways of doing it. One is some people like to have the steps, maybe they're using an existing system and it works like our old one did, where you had the rich text editor and you had all of your steps in one big field. So we do support importing it that way, and it will try its best to break each one of those test cases out of that large field and put the steps in there individually. The other way you can do it is by putting a single line for each step. And I'll show you an example of what that looks like, Carol. I'll just open up one of our, let's see here if I've got one here. I'm sure I've got one in here somewhere. Oh, there it was. Let's see. It was test with steps right here. So what this is showing is we've got a spreadsheet here. And if you'll notice, look at the, this is the first test case right here. I'll just turn these red. It's the same test case, but if I scroll over here to the right, you'll see that I have one line per each step and expected result. So this will become the first step with the expected result, the second step with the expected result, etc. So it depends on how you want to import, but we do provide both of those capabilities. So that's a good question. All right. Next question says, do the average run times work with manual as well as automated tests? We do record the run times for both. So you will see that these are all the manual ones here, but if we went over in the automation, you would see the duration of the automated tests as well. So that's a good question. Okay. Jim says, I'm liking so far what I see on the test management side, that you guys are an on-premises client. Is there a migration process from the old test cases tab to the new test management? When we upgrade, will we see the test cases tab along with the test management tab? Good question, Jim. Yeah, what happens is if you're an existing client and you're an on-premise client and you install the latest version, you'll see both tabs. You'll see the test cases tab as well as the test management tab. And then you'll also see a little movie when you go into the test management tab that shows you the differences between the two. And it will also give you a movie that tells you how to export your data out of the old way of doing it and into the new way of doing it. So it'll have a little movie that demonstrates that for you. And then it also says that once you get everything migrated over, you can actually go and delete all your old test cases, and then that tab will go away. It'll just disappear for you once you've kind of deleted everything out of there. So it sticks around until you've totally cleared it out, but once you've cleared it out, then it'll stop that. All right, so let's go ahead and progress here, and I'll get back to some of these other questions that are coming through. Really great questions. Keep on bringing them in. Those are really good questions that you're asking so far. Okay, so we talked about the test library, and I hinted earlier about configurations. From here in this configurations area, you can create folders of different configurations. So just like you use the folder structure anywhere else, you can create folders. And I've created some here for some mobile configurations where you'll see Android and iPhone. I created some for Windows 7 that shows that we have configurations for Windows 7, IE6, 789, Firefox, Chrome, Safari, and IE9 64-bit. So you can create any number of these configurations. Works just like the rest of the software. You just press Add New, you fill in the configuration name, it adds it for you. All right, so how do you use the configurations in the test library together to actually run test cases? That's done here in what we call test sets. All right, so this is the new area of the software. In the test sets area, you can also organize this into test suites. So you'll see here that we have test sets. I created a suite here for my orders application, and then I broke that down into functional tests as well as regression tests. You'll also notice that it has the capability to link those back to a release. So if I come here and look at all of my test sets for Sprint 1, it'll show me those. If I look at those for Sprint 2, it'll show me those here as well. And I can come back over here and click on either one of these, and it'll show me just the ones related to this particular sprint. So how did I build the test set? How did I link specific test cases into that test set? And how do I link that up to a release and a set of configurations? Well, you add a test set just like we add anything else. You press Add New. You're familiar with that. You'll fill in a little bit of details about the test set, which will be this general information here, who it's assigned to, the design status, all that kind of good stuff. Then it'll take you into a wizard that'll allow you to then drag and drop tests into the test set, and it puts it here in a separate tab called Tests. And you can see I have a number of different tests in this test set. If I get into edit mode, you can navigate your library here, and of course you can drag and drop items right onto the canvas here, and it'll place those into there. Very similar to the way we handle the test management, you can rearrange these and reorganize these by dragging and dropping them if you want to change the sequence in which steps are run. You can also mark specific tests as being a critical test. In other words, if this test doesn't pass, I want to block everything below it. You can even do that at a test level, test set level. Very similar to the test area that I showed you earlier, it also has a run history. So it'll show you every time this test set has run, what release it ran in, what configuration it ran under, whether it passed or failed, how long it took to run, how many tests were in there, how many passed, how many failed, how many were awaiting run, how many blocked, that kind of thing. So all of that information is there. All right. Now, in the edit area, you'll see that in addition to that, this is where you could link this particular test set up to specific releases or iterations and configurations. You do that through traceability just like you're used to. So you just scroll down here and you can see that I have this one tied to this release and this sprint. If I wanted to link it to another, I would just press Link to Items like we always have. You can also see that I have this set up to be run under Windows 7 IE9, Chrome, and 64-bit IE9. So I have it set up for 3 different configurations. If I wanted to link it to additional ones, you just press this little Link to Items and then choose them, and then it'll link those up as well. All right, so how does it look when we're running these, right? So what you can do is you can come here and you can press the Run button. And we now have this new run engine. which I think everybody will enjoy. So it brings up a separate little window up here that allows you to run it, and it automatically pre-selects the release that you're going to run it in, and then you can tell it that you want to run under a different configuration. Maybe I want to run this in for iPhone, for example, right? I can press run, and then it takes me into the run engine. All right. The run engine then says, look, here are all the tests that I'm going to run in this particular test set. Gives me the test names here. It also shows me the average run time from before, so you're seeing about how long it's going to take to run this particular set of tests. All right. And you'll also see if you flagged any of these to stop on failure, you'd see that icon here. We haven't done that in this scenario. And then we can begin the run by pressing the run button. All right. When we're in run mode, it'll show us the test. So this is the add order test. We're going to test it with bad data. And here we can see all of the steps that we're going to go through to run this particular manual test. And we can start checking it off. You can say, well, I clicked on the orders, that worked. Then I entered that worked. Then I entered that worked. If I wanted to add some actual results, you can put down here, ABC worked fine. All right. And move on to the next one here, so you can start recording your actual results. You'll also see that it shows your expected result while you're here. Another nice little feature here is that while you're testing, a lot of times you'll have a clarification on the requirement. You'll think, I wonder how that requirement looks. So you'll notice that all of your linked artifacts are here. So if you wanted to bring the requirement up, you can do a single click there, and it brings your requirement up so you can look at it in more detail, and then you can continue on with the testing. If you get to a test and you just want to mark all of these test steps as passed rather than doing them individually, there's a little pass all steps down here on the bottom. I can press that, and then I can move on to the next test in the series. Now notice that the timer here is working, right? So it's timing my testing. That's how it's building all of that, all of those average run times here. All right. So we're doing that through that. Now notice that this is a critical step. So this step has to pass, otherwise it's going to fail everything below it. Remember, we had that capability. If everything works fine here, we can pass all the steps and then move on to the next test in the series. Now, let's say that we get to this particular test here and something fails. Maybe we get way down here to the bottom and this submit process fails. All right. At this point, we may want to write in the actual result what actually failed, but for me, I like to show the developer what failed rather than actually typing in what failed, because it makes it a lot easier to ensure that they're going to fix the problem, so they'll be able to see the actual steps to reproduce. So what you can do is you can bring up the application that you're testing. I'll bring up this little orders application, and you can use Jing to record a movie that shows the developer what you went through when you failed it. So I'm going to come here. I'm going to record a movie here that shows what actually happened when I tried to update this. So I could come here, open up the file, come here and edit this item. I blank this out and I press OK. It shouldn't allow me to do that, right? So that's the problem. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the test there, and I'm going to then upload that movie to my local FTP. All right. Now, whenever I upload that to my local FTP, rather than typing in here the actual result, I'm just going to say, see this movie. And then I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to choose Paste, and it'll paste that movie in for me automatically. All right. So at this time, I want to fail the test. I press Next, and it'll say, you just failed the test. Would you like to generate a defect for it? I say, sure, why not? So I'll press Yes, and then it'll automatically pop up a defect on my behalf. So at that point, I can then set the priority. I can assign it to a developer. Notice that it filled in the description, the title of the defect, and it also put in step by step what passed and what failed, and it even included the movie here with it as well. All right. I press Submit. It then sends that email off to the developer to let them know that they now have this in their list of things to do. And now I'm just right back into testing mode. At this point, I may want to reset my timer here to start this testing again. I can pass all these, move on. All right, and it continues on. Now, let's say that I get to this particular step, and I go, you know what? I don't have enough steps here. I forgot to add a step here because I forgot to tell them to go into delete mode or whatever. You can actually come in here while you're testing, and you can add steps. So you can say, you know, click on delete first, and then you can put in expected result. Should prompt to delete. All right, and you can press OK there. And if you wanted that before this step, you can just drag and resequence it here. And then you can go ahead and run through the test. You can say, yeah, all this passed now. You can move on. And then it'll say, oh, you just changed those steps. Would you like to now update your library from what the steps that you just changed there? So I'll say, sure, yes, let's go ahead and update the library. Now, I want to tell you that not everybody has the right to add steps while they're doing, or change steps while they're doing this run here. You have to have a security authority to do that. You set that up over in your security group, so you can decide on who has that right or not. I'll go ahead and pass all these. I'll press next. You'll see that it gives us the historical run here, so it shows us which things passed and failed, and it shows us how long they took to run. So now all of that information is now kind of buttoned up here. So we can see that the current status of this has failed. I can then drill into that, look at the run history, and see that we just ran that for the iPhone. It failed, and you can see how many tests ran there too. If you ever need to go back to that level of detail that we were just on, you can press this button, View Run, and then it will then show you the run activity. And if you want to drill in further, you can click further, and you can see every test that passed, or every step that passed or failed, the expected result, the actual result, that kind of thing. So that's always accessible to you as well. All right, so we got a lot of questions coming in from the test management area. Before I address those questions, because I want to make sure we get through a lot of this, is I'm going to show you some of the new dashboards and the reports that come along with this, because I think that you're going to this is going to be helpful to everybody. First of all, I want to go over to the requirements area, and I'm going to click on the dashboard for the requirements area, and you'll notice that we've added a number of new dashboards for requirements, especially from a traceability perspective. That's one area that we really beefed up here. So you'll see that we now have two tabs here for the requirements dashboard. You can look at your dashboard like you used to look at it by folder here, but we can now look at it by release, and I like that view here. So I can come here and look at a particular release like this Sprint 1 here, and it'll show me all of my requirements by status just for that release. I can then apply a filter on top of that, just like we always could. But here's where it really gets interesting. Notice this, requirement test coverage. I can come here and look at a particular sprint. It'll show me all of the requirements that I've written for the sprint, and it'll show me how many test cases have been written and in what status they're in. Okay, so this is the design status. Now, right next door to that, it shows us test runs by requirement. So it shows us each one of the requirements that we're delivering in that sprint, how many tests have passed, how many have failed, how many are awaiting run, and how many are blocked. If you want to look further, you can also look here at defects by requirement. So it'll show how many defects we've discovered for each one of these requirements in the sprint, and we can look at percentage complete. In addition to that, I can also go into the test management side, and I can look at the dashboard for test management. It'll show me two tabs, the test library and then the test sets area. The test sets area shows us run activity. So we can look at any sprint or release and find out who's running our tests, how many have passed for that each one of the testers, how many have failed, how many are waiting to run, etc. We can also look at it by configuration. What operating systems are we running under? We can look at it by test set. If we wanted to analyze what tests are being placed in the library, we can also do that. We can look at it by tester. We can look at it by requirements coverage and lots of other different ways. All right. I'd mentioned earlier that the releases also has dashboards in it. If I go to my dashboard over here, it's going to show me everything rolled up to the release level. So I'll be able to look at release velocity for an entire sprint. So it'll look at everything that's contained in that release. I can look at resource allocation for the release. So it'll show me all of the assignees, how much work I've given them, how much work they're reporting they have done, and how much they have remaining to do. All right. And then it also shows me burn downs here as well at a release level. All right. Now, in addition to those dashboards, there's a number of new reports that you're going to find as well. If If you go to the reports area, you'll see that we have this new area called test management reports. One of my favorite ones here, we have some automated test runs, requirements missing tests, requirements traceability matrices. I like this one, this test run details by requirement. This one will look at every release that you're working on, and it'll show you a list of the requirements that you're delivering in the release, and then right next to it, it'll show you all of the test runs that you've done for each one of those requirements. And then it'll give you kind of a bird's eye view for the entire release so that you can determine not only requirement by requirement how you're delivering the tests on those requirements, you can also look at that more as an aggregate. So you can look at how many have passed, how many failed, how many are waiting run, how many are blocked, that kind of thing, even at that kind of bird's eye view by release. So that's what this report's showing us. So it's showing us each one of the requirements here, the total number of tests run. It's showing us the bird's eye view here. If I continue paging in, it'll take that graph and then drill down into that graph and start looking at it by requirement. So you can see each test set, each configuration that's run, how many tests have run, how many have passed, how many failed, all that kind of information. So if I get on further where I have a bigger release here, I'll just show you one that's on this next page. Here's a good example. We had 4 of these requirements we're delivering in that release. You can see the run activity against it. You can see the bird's eye view over here, and then you can start to drill into the details as well. Okay. In addition, there's release reports. There's all kind of really, really interesting reports that you'll find here. You'll see we probably updated 60 or so reports in this release, so there's a lot of good information here to help you out. The final thing that I want to cover before I actually address all the questions is I want to look at the new team task board. If we go to the project management area, in fact, this team task board is now seen everywhere. I can go to my team task board from project management, and before you might remember that this was only showing you your tasks, and it put them in 3 categories. It showed what was in the to-do list, what was in progress, and what was completed. And you could, of course, log time by pressing post hours. But now what you'll see is we've enhanced it. If I'm looking at Steve's list here, I can then jump over and look at Rick's list, for example. Or I can look at Barry's list. Or I can look at everybody's list, and it'll now aggregate all that data right here on the screen. I can also see other artifacts. Right now I'm looking at tasks, but what if I wanted to look at just requirements for this release? I can easily toggle to that. What if I wanted to look at just defects for this release? I can easily toggle to that. So you'll see each area of the software now has this team task board, and when you get into that mode, it automatically places on you on that related artifact. I'm in the requirements right now. It's showing me just requirements. If I pop over here to the defect section and I click on the team task board, it'll position me just on defects. So it's context sensitive that way. All right, so lots of really great questions coming in. That really kind of covers a lot of the areas that I wanted to cover today. I want to now go through and answer all the questions that have queued up here. Before we do that, if anybody gets to the point where you have to jump off of the meeting a little bit early, because I'm going to stick around as long as anybody's around to listen to the answers to these questions. But I do want to be sensitive to everybody's time. If you do have any questions, feel free to call us at 978-236-7900. All right. And then finally, before you bow out today, if you don't mind, while you're thinking about it, go ahead and do the quick survey that we have. It's out here at surveymonkey.com/s/ALM2011. So that's surveymonkey.com/s/ALM2011. And what you'll find on that survey real quick is it's a very quick survey. I think it has about 8 things on it. It'll ask you about 8 questions, and it's really going to allow you to rate what you saw today, you know, whether you think the features that we developed for you you would use them, how often you would use them, that kind of thing, whether you think they would help you. And it'll also ask you for suggestions to the upcoming versions of our product as well. So we certainly want your feedback. So again, that's surveymonkey.com/s/ALM2011, and I will paste that into the chat box over here so that everybody has that conveniently for him. Okay, so let's go to your questions now. I'm going to go back through the list of questions here. Looks like, let's see here. Okay, I answered the question for Carol about the steps, uploading of steps here. Okay, John asks, how is the average runtime calculated on the test? If it's calculated, what happens if someone starts a test case and then leaves their desk for a period of time? Good question, John. So, yeah, that would affect it, John. So if you're over here and you're running a test, we'll go to our test sets here, and you get into run mode. I'll just choose maybe Android here. And you begin the run, as you've seen before. You'll see that the timer is ticking, right? And you may get here and you may get a phone call, right? Well, what you can do if you get a phone call is you can use this little pause button on the bottom of the page, and it'll stop that timer so you can then take the phone call. And then when you resume the phone call or get off the phone call, you can then come back and press start, and it'll start your timer again. It could be that maybe you started this and you kind of wanted to start it all over again. You can also come here and reset the timer by pressing reset here, and it'll reset the timer on that as well. So good question there. All right. Let's see here. Okay, good. Question from Mike Cousins. He says, can the orders application easily be replicated, maintaining the folder structure and test cases within each folder? So I think what he is asking there is, can you copy over like a folder structures? And the answer prior to this release was no, but the answer now is actually yes, which is really great. So let's say that we came over to our test area, right? And we added a new folder here called uTunes. All right, I'll just create one here. And under uTunes, maybe we added another folder here called Artist Search. And then maybe we have one here called Upload Music or something like that. All right. And let's say that you had, this set of folders and you wanted to copy this folder structure somewhere else, maybe over to requirements or defects. You can do copy folder structure by right-clicking. Then you can go over to requirements, for example. I'll go to my show requirements here. And then I can just paste that folder structure in, and it'll create that same structure for me. I can do that over in defects as well. So that's a good question. All right. All right, so let's see here. All right. Leonardo asked about importing test cases contained in the old test cases tab to the new test management side. Yeah, Leonardo, when you start using the software, there should be a little movie out there that shows you how to do that. You basically just do an export and an import. But one of the things that you'll want to do is you'll want to make use of the folder structures. So you can do what I did earlier. Like if you had your old test cases up there, you could come there and copy the entire folder structure and then paste that into the test library area. Export your data out of the old way of doing it, import it into the new way of doing it, and it should have all your data there. So that's how you would do that. All right. Okay. Cheryl says, how does the conversion from previous versions work? Currently, we have the steps in the description rather than the steps to reproduce. That's okay as well, Cheryl. What you can do there is when you do an import, you tell it during the import process what field has your steps in there. So if you happen to have yours in the description rather than the steps to reproduce, you simply map that, so it's not a problem there. All right. Faye wanted to know if we could add steps while we were testing. I showed that a little earlier, so that was probably a question that came in before I actually showed that capability. All right. So Leslie says, can a test be displayed while you're in the browser, a la test execute, in the corner and hidden? I don't quite understand that one, Leslie. If you want to kind of maybe restate what you're asking there, I'm not quite sure what that question is, but I'll be happy to answer that if you'll do that. All right. Faye asks about the movie capability. She saw us record the movie and paste that movie into the actual result as we were running the test, and then it automatically brought that over to the defect. That movie capability is done through a product called Gene, and if you're not familiar with Gene, you can go out to www.jingproject.com. That's J-I-N-G project.com. In fact, I will put that URL here in the chat window. All right. It is a free product. You can download the free version here, and with Jing you can record movies, and we integrate in with their clipboard, so as you record a movie and you upload it either to Screencast or you can configure it to upload it to your local FTP. After the upload's done, you can then just paste the URL into your artifacts here and it'll work fine. So good question there. All right. Donald wants to know, can ALMComplete work with third-party defect tracking systems? That's a good question, Donald. Yeah, we can. We do have a synchronization module. It's developed by one of our OEM partners called OpsHub, and there's a long list of different the defect tracking tools that we can integrate with. I know we integrate with Jira and Bugzilla and Team Foundation Server and Quality Center and Rally and version 1. There's a whole host of them. There's probably 10 or 12. If there's one specifically that you want me to check on, just type that into the Q&A box and I'll answer that for you. All right. Felice says, during execution, can he disable or enable any steps? Like during the steps, can we give some user roles to run specific steps? You can certainly delete steps as you're running and then not save those back to your library, so you can do that. But we don't have the ability to say a specific person can only run 3 of the 5 steps or anything like that. We don't have that capability. All right. Melissa says, when you're changing tests and you're creating new test steps or removing test steps, is that reflected in the history? Yeah, Melissa, it is. It's reflected in the history. And not only does it reflect it in the history, we've started the process of versioning your test cases as well. So if you change your your test cases, you will see the history here. It'll show you any, like you can see this step right here was changed. This one was changed here. You can see we copied some steps here. So all of that's recorded in history. You'll also see that there's a version number here, so as you start changing your steps, it'll start versioning it. And you'll see a release that's going to come out pretty soon where we're going to allow you to not only version those steps, but roll back to a prior version. So that's coming out in an upcoming release. So we'll have some, not only some versioning capabilities, but rollback capability in that as well. All right. So John says, how do I assign test case execution to a release without using requirements? We have QAComplete, not ALMComplete. Sure. So you don't really have to tie the test cases themselves back to a requirement to link the set of test cases back to a particular release. In other words, I could come here and to the test library, and I could have a set of test cases here that aren't linked anyway at all to the requirement. But when I build the test set, I can still bring those test cases into the test set and link that test set right up to a requirement by just simply pressing this link to item. So there's no problems by doing that, John. All right. Next question says, how do I run reports on test execution ignoring requirements? In the reports area, there's a number of different tests, or a number of different test management reports that will do it outside of the requirement side. You can run them by test set, by configuration, by a bunch of different ways here. And I think that your team is on an on-premises edition of the software. If you wanted to take any of those reports and kind of change them to kind of fit them just the way that you want them to run, you can also do that with Crystal reports as well. So if there's not an exact report that you need, it's a pretty easy process to go in and change existing reports or create new ones. All right. So Kat says, last time I checked, you could only log time per test case. Is there a way to log time to a group of test cases instead? When you say log time, I think you're probably talking about more of logging your time individually day by day. I don't think that you can log time manually to the test set. You could create let's say a task for your testing process, and then you could log time to that task, which would probably be inclusive of a lot of tests that you've run. Hopefully that answers your question, Kat. If it's not, just clarify that. All right. Let's see here. Next question says, do you have a data repository and allow embedding of test data in the test scripts or export of test data from the repository to send through a test run for batch processing? Our TestComplete product, our automated testing tool, does have the ability to do data-driven testing, which I think is a little bit of what you're asking about. I think there's more to what you're asking as well. I think one of the questions that you may be asking there is, when I'm creating, let's say, a test case in my library, and let's say I get to one of these steps that have some specific data that I want them to check on while they're running the test, can I upload like a spreadsheet or something like that to this particular step here, step number 2? The answer to that is yes. There's this little button here called attachments. So if you wanted to add a file attachment, like maybe a spreadsheet or something like that to that step, you could do it. And you could tell it, you can see it automatically selected that step here for me. And then when I press submit, it'll upload that particular spreadsheet, and now it'll associate it with that particular step. You'll see that we have a file attachment there. Now when I run this test in a test set, you probably saw the traceability screen a little, or the run engine earlier, and we had the traceability items on the bottom of that run engine where we popped up the requirement earlier. You can also pop up your spreadsheet because it'll be associated with that step as well. So hopefully that's helpful. All right. So Manoj says, will this webinar be available for later viewing? Most of the questions are related to upgrading. Yeah, Manoj, we're gonna we've recorded the webinar, and if you'll just put in there your email address for us to send the recorded session to. Anybody that wants me to follow up at the end of this with a recording, just put in your email address saying I want this recording, send it to this email address. I'll send it there for you. All right. All right. More people saying they want the recording here. Okay, so Leslie clarified one of the questions she had earlier. If you remember, Leslie was asking, okay, when I'm running a set of tests, I think what she was really saying was when I start running these tests, it pops up the running engine, and it does pop on top of all of your other windows that are there. Her question is, does it stay there? Because when she runs Test Execute, one of our automated testing tools, it'll stay there, and if you're running another application, it'll always stay behind it. Because this is a web-based application, Leslie, we don't have the ability to force that Z order like that, but it does pop on top, and then you can kind of resize your application to the right of it, so you can see your test steps on the left side, and then your application on the right side, or maybe even on a separate monitor that you have. But it's not guaranteed that it'll stay on top like Test Execute works. Okay, good question there. Okay, Jim says, will the folder copy feature work with the old test cases tab? Yeah, Jim, it will. As soon as you upgrade to the latest version, you'll have that capability to copy folder structures from the old test cases tab to the new if you want. All right. Don asked, yeah, if we have an integration with Jira for defect tracking. Yes, we do. Lance says, he joined a little late. He says, does this version have the ability to create modular tests similar to the test functionality in Quality Center? Yeah. What you can do, Lance, I think what you're asking is, can you take your library and create kind of modules within an application and have all your test cases live with that module? You can do that. And then you can start to group those into test sets similar to in Quality Center, it's called. You have the test planning area, and then you have the lab. The The planning area is similar to our test library where you can organize your tests into modules. And then our test sets is more like the Quality Center Test Lab if you're familiar with that. Right? Carol says she created a custom field for steps. Will I be able to transfer that field to the Steps tab? Yep, absolutely. Any built-in field or custom field can be mapped during the import process. No problem there. All right. Carol says you have this new prerequisites field. Is that a new field? I think that's actually a custom field that I built while I was doing the this particular project. But you can create that custom field with no problem, Carol. All right. Let's see here. All right. Kat said that she was unsure if they could create tasks or not. Kat, if you have the ALMComplete edition rather than the QAComplete edition, you will have the project management capabilities, which means that you can create the tasks. No problem there. All right. The next question from John says, can we integrate with ClearQuest? We don't have an integrator with ClearQuest at this time, John, but I think we have one with Rational Team Concert, but not ClearQuest. All right. Manoj says, will custom fields allow rich text editing? Yeah, Manoj, if your fields are over 100 characters in width, it automatically becomes rich text editing for you. So yes, it will allow that. Carol says, I created a custom field named Test Setup, so thanks. Everything's good there. All right. Well, I think we just exhausted all of the questions. Any other questions before we close out today? All right. Now, again, before everybody signs out, please take a moment to go out to surveymonkey.com/s/ALM 2011. Again, we really want to hear your feedback because we drive the future of this product from your comments. And if you want to improve the product over time, that's the best way to do it, is to provide your feedback, because we listen very closely to our clients. Okay. All right. I think that's all the questions that came through. I do appreciate everybody's time today. If there's any questions that I wasn't able to answer for you today that you want clarification on, I'm going to type into the chat box here my direct email address. It's just steve.miller@smartbear.com. So feel free to send me an email directly, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. All right. Everybody have a good day, and thanks for attending the webinar today. Bye-bye.